Hey, how you doing, man? First of all, let me thank you for inviting me onto your computer screen. In this lesson, we're going to scratch program smooth auto-scrolling effects on your web pages. After we discuss the core programming that makes the magic happen, I'll show you how to externalize and reuse your scripted creation. You could even offer it to others as a little lightweight, efficient framework for smooth auto-scrolling on their pages if they don't happen to know JavaScript programming so well. Now, just so you have a really good idea of what you'll be learning how to program in this video lesson, let's quickly take a look at and play with the finished application that you'll have at the end of the video. But instead of snapping to section 3 when I click this link, it's going to animate the scroll bar. It automates and animates the scroll bar. Now when I click this link, go back to top, it animates the scroll bar and the whole page back to the top. And traditionally, it would instantly snap to document section 3 when I hit that link if I was creating normal named anchor links. Okay, we're going to begin with the bare bones of an HTML5 web document, and we'll start in the head element. We'll start a style tag, type text CSS, and then go down a couple of lines and make sure we close that style element. That's where we're going to put the CSS. And under the style element, we're also going to have a script element. And go down a couple of lines and make sure you close your script element. Now you can choose to leave your script element like that, or put the type attribute, text JavaScript. And in the script element is where we're going to place our JavaScript. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to externalize your JavaScript. That way we just call on an external.js file here in this line 7, instead of having our JavaScript visible within the document. And by the way, the file that I'm working in is a .html file. So yours can be index.html, services.html. It can also be index.php or services.php as long as it's a web document. Now before we put in the CSS and the JavaScript for the document, we're going to go and put all the HTML into the body element. So first thing, I'm just going to type the sentence JavaScript smooth animated auto scroll tutorial. I'm going to highlight all that, and I'm going to make sure I wrap it in an h2 tag. Now I want to give this h2 an ID attribute with a value of my heading. Now let's go down one line and let's open an A element, which is a link, and let's make its href attribute equal to the £sign. That way it doesn't navigate anywhere. Then we're going to make an onClick event attribute, and that's going to be equal to return false. And we're doing this so that the $sign doesn't get put into the user's address bar up top in their address bar when they click this link. If we didn't put return false in the onClick event, that $sign would show up in their address bar at the end of the URL. And you don't really want that. Now we're going to put an onMouse down event handler on that link, and that's going to be equal to the JavaScript function that we want to run. And what we'll name that function is autoscroll2. Open, close parentheses, and you can put in your semicolon. Now in the inner HTML section here, we're going to type in document section 1. So this is the little link that when clicked will auto smooth scroll to the first section of the document. So let's make that first section of the document. We're going to put a div right here. This div is going to have an ID equal to div1. The class is going to be equal to content box. So whatever divs on the page that have the class of content box will be affected by the CSS that we create in just a moment. So since this div has a unique ID on the page of div1, that is going to be the element that we're going to assign this link to auto scroll to. So in the argument for the auto scroll function, which this auto scroll function has not been written yet, it's going to be written in our JavaScript element here in just a second. But we're going to need to pass an argument of which element on the page that we want to auto scroll to. So we have to pass that argument right here through the function, and we're going to put it in between single quotes, div1, because that is the ID of this div here. Now when we highlight this div, press Ctrl C and copy it, go down one line and make this one say div2, div2 content. Do that 2 more times. So now you have 4 content sections. Now let's highlight the link, and we're going to need 4 of those to go to those specific sections of the document. We're going to need little links that the user can click to smooth scroll to those sections. So put in 3 more and change this to say document section 2, section 3, section 4, and then div 2, div 3, div 4. So you see what's happening? When each link is clicked, it fires off the function on the onMouseDown event handler to auto scroll to whichever div or whichever element on the page, any point on the page that you want to make it auto scroll to. Now underneath each div you want to have another little link. So anywhere where we're using the A elements here, you can trade those for buttons or any kind of user interface that you want to use. You can use button elements, input elements, the A element like I'm using, whatever you want. So right underneath each content section, so you see underneath div 1 here, I'm going to place another link. And this link is similar to the one up top, but instead of its onMouseDown event firing a function called AutoScrollTo, it's going to fire a function called ResetScroller. And that's going to be another custom function that we're going to create, and it has just a couple of lines of code, and that is made to reset the scroller back to the top. Now in the ResetScroller function, we have to pass one argument to that one as well. And we're passing the value of myHeading. And remember, myHeading was the H2 element on top. Or in your case, it might be the header or whatever. You want to make sure the ID for that element, whatever element's at the top of the page, is being passed through as an argument to the ResetScroller function. Now once you have that one, that little link in place, you want to put 3 more under each div that's holding a whole lot of content on your page. Now on these first 4 A elements, right after those, let's just put some line breaks. That way they're not all in the same line. And that is all of the HTML. Now we can go up here into the style element and put in the CSS that's going to affect these content boxes, your divs, your content sections on the page. So you can highlight that class name, Control C, copy it, and then up in the style element, let's type in div dot paste in content box, open curly brace, go down a couple of lines and close your curly brace. Then I'm going to pop in these 5 lines of CSS. And actually we can take a look at what we have now by rendering this page in our favorite browser. So you see what I have? Now when I click these links, nothing's going to happen because I have no JavaScript yet. But all of my CSS and HTML is ready to go. Alright, so I can collapse this CSS now, since we don't really need to see that. And I'm also going to collapse the HTML because we're going to focus on the JavaScript. And the first thing we're going to do is create 3 variables and give them default values. Now these 3 variables are going to be used within our AutoScrollTo function. So let's begin that function. Type in function space AutoScrollTo, and you can see I'm camel casing here. So each occurrence of a word after the first word within my function name has a capital letter. That's called camel casing. It helps you identify where the words are in there. Okay, that's all camel casing. Open close parentheses, then put the opening curly brace, go down a couple of lines and put in your closing curly brace, and you'll have your function nest all set up and ready to go. Now remember, this function, let's look at the HTML. Each time this function is called, when the user clicks these links, we're passing an argument through of whichever div that we want to smooth scroll to on the page. So we have to pick up that div, whatever element, and we'll call it EL for short. EL stands for element. Now within the function, the first variable that we're going to create is going to be named current Y, and that's going to be equal to window.pageYOffset. Now what window.pageYOffset returns to your script is the exact number of pixels that the user has scrolled content down into the page. Now after that variable, we need another variable. It's going to be called target Y, and we call it target Y because the Y position is the vertical plane. Your X position is your horizontal plane. Since we're doing up and down scrolling, we don't have to worry about the X position at all. We're just going to worry about the Y positioning because that deals with up and down, vertical. X deals with horizontal, sideways. Now the reason why we call this variable target Y is because it's going to represent whichever div is being passed through as arguments when the function is called to run. So when the user clicks this link here, div3 is going to be sent through this function, and it's going to be represented as EL. So we say document.getElementById EL, that would be div 1, 2, 3, or 4, dot offset top property. When you use the offset top property on a div, what that returns to your script is exactly how many pixels that element, that div on the page, is from the top or its parent element. So however far it is down into its parent element, in our case the parent element for all these divs is the body element. So however far div 4 is sitting on the page within the body element, however far down it is, we get that exact pixel number back, and that's what target Y represents. Now these next two lines within our JavaScript are only in place because when the scrolling happens to hit the bottom of the page, we want to make sure that we cancel the animation and stop the whole process of scrolling. Because what will happen is when the auto scrolling mechanism hits the bottom of the page and the user tries to scroll with their mouse back up the page, the animation will keep going, pushing them back down to the bottom. So these two variables are going to help alleviate that problem. The first one is we get the body height. Here's the body element on our page. So what we say to get the body height is document.body.offsetHeight property. Now the Y position variable we get by adding current Y, which we discussed up here how we get that and what that all represents. So we use current Y plus the window.innerHeight property. And in a moment, in an if condition in the script, we're going to compare to see if the Y position is greater than the body height. If the Y position happens to be greater than the body height, then we're going to cancel the whole animation and the scrolling stops because the user has hit the bottom of the page. I just wanted to tell you guys that's why we're creating these two variables. Now the next line in the script, we're going to create our animation mechanism, and we'll just name that var animator, and that's going to be equal to the setTimeout method. And you can also use setInterval for animating things on a web document. Now setTimeout gets two arguments passed through it. The first one is the function that you want to happen, which is this one right here. This is the code that you want to execute. So we'll just put that function in and we'll put our opening and closing parentheses there. Now the next argument that it gets is the milliseconds. And we're going to have speed variable control the milliseconds. And actually that's something that never changes in this particular script. So you could just actually write, see how I have var speed 24? You can actually just put 24 there. So just know that speed is 24 because we created a variable outside of our function called speed and it has a value of 24. So that's 24 milliseconds. And remember, 1000 milliseconds is equal to 1 second. So what's happening in the setTimeout with a variable name of animator is that the autoScroll2 function is repeatedly, very quickly, many times per second, is being called to run repeatedly over and over and over again. And that's how animation is done in JavaScript. So we have to pass one argument through this autoScroll2 function every time it runs, which is EL. So let's press Control-C on EL there. And we have to pass it between single quotes here. But you'll notice if we put single quotes, it's going to give us a syntax problem. So backslash before each single quote. And you won't have any problems with single quotes there. Then in between those two single quotes that have backslashes around them there, we're going to put single quote plus EL plus single quote. Alright? So you see what we have there? I'll even zoom in on it real nice so you can see the exact character configuration I have at play. It will pass the value of either div1, div2, div3, or div4 back through that function repeatedly many times per second as it's being called to run here by the setTimeout method. You can pass more arguments if you like. Now right under the animator function we're going to have an if condition. And this is where we're going to do that check I was talking about to see if the scrolling mechanism happens to hit the bottom of the page. You don't want the animation to keep going. If the user happens to try and scroll up again, it's going to keep animating down and hit the bottom. So you want to clear the timeout on the animator to make the animation stop only if it hits the bottom of the page. So after that if condition, we can put an else statement. Open your curly brace, go down a couple of lines, and close your curly brace. Now here in the else condition is where we're going to have a little bit of mathematical calculations. All your setTimeout is doing is creating a very fast running loop that will enable you to animate if you adjust some numbers on things. And remember in the beginning, I told you we were going to learn how to animate the scroll method of the window object. Alright, so to do the animating, all we need is another little if and else condition statement, and then that is the last little bit that we're going to have within our auto scroll to function. And let me explain these last few lines. So when animating, if the Y position is greater than the height, you're going to clear the animation altogether. This auto scroll to function will cease to run if the scroll mechanism hits the bottom of the page. Else, you want it to keep animating. Now you have to have an if condition in place here to see if the target that you're trying to scroll to has been reached or not, because how else would the animation know to stop? So you have to evaluate if the current position on the page happens to be where that target element that we want to scroll to, where that hits that, then we want to make sure we clear timeout again on the animator. So you can set all of that logic up by simply saying if the current Y is less than the target Y minus distance, and you know what distance is, it's 40. So the target Y, whichever div, 1, 2, 3, or 4, its current location, that would be target Y, minus 40 pixels. So if the current Y is less than target Y minus 40, then we're going to set the scroll amount. Now the scroll Y amount is a very important number for your script, because that's the one that you're going to keep changing and adding to make the animated effect. And what you're adding to the current Y is 40. You're adding distance. So you can change that any number you want. It could be 100, it could be 10. So that's how you get the animated effect. Is you take the current Y position where the actual scroll bar is on the page, and you add 40 pixels to it, and it moves it that many pixels very, very quickly. That way it seems animated. Now you take that scroll Y amount and you actually apply it to the window.scroll method, and that's really, this line is the magic behind the whole thing. You're running the window.scroll method, which allows you to scroll to a specific point on the page. Basically, if this said 900 and I ran this line by itself in JavaScript right here, the window would scroll to 900 pixels down into the page, but it will snap to it. There will be no animation. The fact that we have a variable here that is changing very, very quickly over time, it's slowly getting bigger and bigger, that's going to animate the scroll. So what you see, what appears to happen, is a scrolling animation to the point on the page that you want. So if the current Y is less than the target Y, you want it to keep animating to that point on the page until it gets there. Once it gets there, this else condition comes into play and you clear timeout. So that's the whole bloody script. Okay, now underneath the auto scroll to function, we're going to need one more little function that is reset scroller. Remember the little links that say go back to top? We got to have those in place, and actually you can test your application right now without even putting that in. So if we click any of these links, it'll scroll to that section. But since we have no reset scroller function yet, when we click these, it won't go back to top yet. But these work just fine now. So in your web document, right under the auto scroll to function, let's go ahead and collapse that. Right underneath auto scroll to, let's put a function called reset scroller. And it's going to be very similar to the auto scroll to function, but it's definitely not as big. There's not as many lines in it as there are in the other one. Basically what it does is it goes the other way. Instead of scroll Y being equal to current Y plus distance, here we're using minus distance. So current Y minus 40 every time will make the page appear to animate going back up. And once it gets there, we clear timeout on the animator. An animator is the same thing as it was in the first function. Set timeout, and it's set to run this function reset scroller over and over again. That's why we put these set timeout methods to run within the function that they're calling. It creates a loop, and it's running the same speed. You can make this one run a different speed. So basically, if you wanted to scroll up faster, let me show you what I'm talking about. If you wanted to click document section 3, so if you wanted it to scroll back to the top super lightning fast, you could just change this variable here from speed to, let's say, 10. And instead of speed being 24, it's going to be 10. You can even make that faster by going maybe 5. Now if I test this and I go to section 3, when I click go back to top, it's going to be super fast. Go to section 4, back to top. See how fast it goes back? So you can use the same variable to go the same speed as your first function, or you can change it up. And if you guys have any questions, basically a lot of this code is the same thing that the function on top is doing, and I already explained every line of that top function. So basically everything within this function has been explained already. The only difference here is that we're going minus instead of plus distance. Alright, let's render this in our favorite browser and see what we have. Let's go to section 1. It's good. Let's go back to top. Section 2. Good. Back to top. Section 3. Good. Go back to top. Link. Works nice. Now all the way to the bottom. Back to top. Good. Alright, let's take the inside of this function, reset scroller, and collapse all of that code. Now let's take all of our HTML. Let's collapse that as well, and the CSS is already collapsed. Now remember, in the beginning of the video I told you guys I'm going to show you how to externalize this code, and you can even show people how to use your external script as a framework for their pages, so they don't have to write this kind of script, and they can just use your functions as long as you externalize it. Let's just go ahead and give this script tag the source attribute, and let's make that equal to, let's name the JavaScript file autoscroll2.js. Okay, so once you have that in place, take all of the JavaScript, highlight all of the JavaScript, both functions and these 3 variables. So get those 3 variables and both functions highlighted, Control X, cut them out. Now take this closing script tag and just put it right next to the opening script tag to where it's all on one line. Now press Control S to save this document. Go to File, New. Basically you just want to create a .js JavaScript file. Once you get that ready, press Control V to put in all of your code. So there's your function autoscroll2, and there's your function reset, all within an external document. Now you just go to File, Save As, and I'm just going to save it in the same folder here, autoscroll2. Save. So you see here I have autoscroll2.js. So that file's been saved, and my original file that we've been working on has been saved. So now if I run this script, it should still work because I'm tapped into that external autoscroll2 file here. See? So what we've done is we've modulated it and made it external, and anybody who we want can just put this one line into the head tag of their document and use those functions. They don't have to actually write those functions or have them in their document. So now let's test. Run this in your favorite browser, and if everything animates, we're successfully connected. So everything animates just fine. That means we're successfully connected to the external autoscroll2.js. Now, to allow other people to use this external framework that you've now created, all you have to do is make autoscroll2.js available to everyone on the web. So you just put it up on the web somewhere and allow them to link to it. Or you offer it up as download, and they can just put it on their own server, on their own website, and connect straight to this file on their own server. That way they don't have to depend on your server being active or available to make this script run. Alright, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and within it we demonstrated a lot of core JavaScript programming. We showed how real JavaScript animation is created from scratch to animate certain properties and methods of the JavaScript DOM. And beyond that, we showed you how to externalize it and modulate it and make it available to anyone that wants to use it. Maybe they don't know JavaScript programming so well. You happen to know core JavaScript programming, so you can create all kind of functions and cool frameworks for people to use, and they don't have to learn the first thing.